Welcome to the deep dive. You know how this goes. You send us the interesting sources and we dive in, pull out the key bits, and try to make sense of them together.
And today, we've got something really unique. A listener shared a whole series of communications from someone calling himself Dr. Keith Smith.
Right, and he claims to be a former chief engineer at NASA. That's quite the title.
It is. And our mission here is to really explore what he's saying in these documents he provided. He makes some extraordinary claims about, well, Earth itself and NASA's role.
Yeah, extraordinary is definitely the word. We're sticking strictly to what's in these communications, exploring his narrative.
Exactly, just laying out the information as presented in the source.
Okay, so let's get into it. Dr. Smith says he joined NASA back in '96. Believe the standard stuff, space program, round Earth.
Spent years working on the shuttle program, apparently totally unaware of the bigger picture he later describes.
Then comes 2012. He gets promoted to chief engineer.
And this, according to him, is the turning point. Leads to a big meeting in D.C.
He names names, too. Charles Bolden, the administrator then, Lori Garver, Robert Lightfoot, a whole list of top officials. Coates, Cabana, Goldman, Abdelati.
Right, quite a gathering. And it's in this meeting, Smith claims, that Bolden drops the bombshell.
The big one. He quotes Bolden as saying, "Everything that you have ever been taught is a lie."
Specifically referring to the Earth being flat.
Just, wow. Flat out states it.
According to Smith, yes. Unequivocally.
And the reason why they'd supposedly hide this?
Well, the rationale Smith attributes to Bolden is fascinating. It's about preventing societal collapse.
How so?
The idea, as Smith presents it, is that keeping people thinking they're insignificant, on a tiny planet in a huge universe, that maintains the power of the elite.
Especially after the Industrial Revolution sort of shook things up.
Exactly. Challenged the old order. Smith even throws in this claim that, 200 years ago, everyone knew the Earth was flat and central.
That's a heck of a claim. So how did Smith react?
Disbelief, apparently. He says he actually laughed.
I probably would too.
Right. But then, he claims, the other officials there backed Bolden up, shared their own stories of coming around to this idea.
He mentions one guy, Goldman. Took months to be convinced.
Yeah, supposedly.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of, a very gradual and perhaps difficult acceptance process if you take his account at face value.
It makes you think, though. Someone with an engineering background, accepting something so fundamentally different, it's quite a narrative.
It really is. It suggests a very powerful process of persuasion or revelation, depending on how you look at it from his perspective.
So, okay, if this is the reality he's describing, how does NASA actually operate? What was his job as chief engineer in all this?
Well, he claims his main role became designing stuff that looked real but wasn't actually functional. Plausible components for missions.
Designed to fool who?
Lower-level engineers, apparently. People working on specific parts who he says were kept in the dark about the overall deception.
So like building fake parts for fake missions?
Essentially, yes. Creating the appearance of space travel technology.
What about rocket launches? We see those happen.
He addresses that. Says the rockets are real, they do launch, but they only fly until they're out of camera range. Then, he claims, they're just ditched into the ocean.
And then fished out.
Recovery teams salvage them. Yeah, that's the claim. The logistics of that alone, hiding it would be immense.
Hugely complex. Okay, and the shuttle. Those iconic landings.
He says the shuttles were often just flown back, piggyback on that big 747, the shuttle carrier aircraft.
Right, I've seen pictures of that.
And then the crews would basically just glide them down onto the runway, making it look like they'd returned from orbit.
Creating the illusion. What about astronauts in space? Spacewalks? ISS footage? How does he explain faking that?
Here he admits his knowledge is a bit limited, cites the whole need-to-know thing.
Convenient.
Well, yes. But he does mention things we've heard in other contexts, like large swimming pools for weightlessness simulation.
The neutral buoyancy labs.
And those zero-G aircraft, the vomit comets, for filming scenes inside the supposed ISS.
Okay, but what about the ISS itself? The actual thing people track flying overhead. You can see it.
Yes. This is one of the most detailed parts of his claim. He says what we see is not a space station orbiting hundreds of miles up.
No. Then what is it?
He claims it's one of 5 specially designed airplanes. Highly modified aircraft.
Blamp. What kind?
Modified B-2 bombers, supposedly from the late 90s.
Stealth bombers. Flying that high.
He claims they were modified for much higher cruising altitudes, like 98,000 feet and longer range.
98,000 feet.
Yeah.
That's high, but nowhere near space orbit altitudes.
Nowhere near, no.
Yeah.
And he adds details like replacing radar-absorbent materials with transparent ones, reinforcing them, pretty specific stuff.
And these ISS planes,
Yeah.
they just fly around pretending to be the station.
Following preset routes, yeah. Mimicking the orbit we expect. He says they mostly fly at night and avoid populated areas.
And they light up.
Thousands of LEDs on the underside, he claims, designed to perfectly match the brightness and color of sunlight reflecting off the real ISS.
Wow. Maintaining 5 secret high-altitude planes, coordinating flights, keeping it all secret. The scale of coordination is just mind-boggling.
It's a central challenge to the plausibility of such a scenario. Absolutely. The sheer complexity.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Celestial mechanics. How does the sky work in this model, according to Smith? Stars.
He throws out an idea. Maybe they're chunks of ice, embedded in the firmament.
The firmament, like a solid dome over the Earth.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Chunks of ice instead of, giant balls of burning gas millions of miles away.
Right, definitely different. What about maps? Does he have a map of this flat Earth?
He says the accurate map is top secret, but he mentions it's similar to other flat Earth maps you might see, only with more accurate continents.
More accurate how?
Particularly the southern hemisphere. He claims the continents there are less distorted than on typical flat Earth maps, and the distances between them are much larger than on a globe.
Larger distances. He claims he worked on a project that supports this.
Yeah, he mentions a trans-Pacific commercial aircraft project with Boeing, implying the flight planning reflected these greater southern distances.
And the poles. North Pole.
Not much known, he says, beyond research stations, standard enough.
But the South Pole.
That's the edge in this view. An ice wall surrounding the known world.
An ice wall, like in Game of Thrones.
Sort of, yeah. He claims there's security there, stopping people from going too far, but he's not sure who's running it.
And what's beyond the wall? Does he know?
He speculates. Maybe where the firmament meets the ground. Maybe. More continents, it's left open.
Okay. Sun and moon, how do they work?
They circle around above the flat disk, he claims, centered roughly over the North Pole.
Circling.
And they spiral in and out between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. That's what supposedly creates the seasons.
So closer in summer, further in winter, depending on your hemisphere.
That's the idea presented, yes.
What about stars in the southern hemisphere? They appear to rotate around a point, just like northern stars do around Polaris. How does that happen without a globe?
He points to the firmament again. Suggests it has light-distorting properties, maybe made of something he calls aether crystal.
Ether crystal.
And this crystal interacts with a liquid upper atmosphere, bending the starlight to create that rotational effect we see.
Lots of new physics involved here.
Definitely requires a completely different understanding of physics and cosmology than the standard model.
So, applying this model, ISS transits. When people see the ISS cross the sun or moon.
Simple, according to him. That's just one of those ISS airplanes flying in front of the sun or moon.
Okay, lunar eclipses. When the moon goes red.
Not the Earth's shadow, he claims. It's another object, something he calls Anubis.
Anubis, like the Egyptian god.
He uses the name, yeah. Believes it's a chunk of that same ether crystal that broke off the firmament. It passes in front of the moon.
And the red color.
That's light filtering through Anubis, apparently. Gives it that orange or red hue.
And the solar eclipses.
That one's simpler in his model, just the moon itself passing in front of the sun. He proposes the moon is at a lower altitude than the sun.
Okay. What about the moon's appearance? Craters?
Yeah.
Shadows?
Yeah.
There's even this thing some people call the lunar wave.
Right. He claims that since the early 2000s, when telescopes got much better for consumers, NASA started using a global network of holographic projectors.
Holographic projectors.
To do what?
To touch up the moon's appearance, make it look consistent, maybe hide things. He doesn't say the real surface is vastly different, though.
Yeah.
Still has craters from impacts.
A global hologram of the moon. The technical challenges there seem astronomical, pardon the pun.
You could say that. Maintaining a consistent, globally visible hologram, yeah, that's a huge hurdle technologically.
What about the sun and moon's basic properties? Heat, light.
He describes the sun as generating heat, obviously. Says it vaporizes the liquid space around it. He posits that the upper atmosphere becomes liquid. Liquid space. Okay. And the moon.
Emits cold light, he claims. That's a common idea in some alternative cosmologies.
Cold light. Interesting. Does he mention anything about a second sun, Nibiru, things like that?
No, he says he's unfamiliar with that concept and actually asks for a video about it in the communication.
Huh. What about the fact that everyone sees the same face of the moon? How does that work if it's closer and moving above a flat plane?
Back to the firmament again. Its light-bending properties supposedly make it appear consistent.
The firmament does a lot of heavy lifting in this model.
It seems to be the explanation for many observed phenomena that contradict a simple flat plane.
He doesn't directly address how people in, say, Australia see the sun setting south of west in their summer, does he? South of the Tropic of Capricorn.
Not directly in this text, no. But it's implied that the specific spiraling path of the sun he describes would account for these observations within his flat Earth framework.
Right. The details of that path would be crucial. One more specific. Those weird boat wakes, sometimes seen in SpaceX launch footage.
Yeah. He says the rockets are real, built to look realistic. As for anomalies like wakes, he kind of shrugs it off. Speculates maybe Elon Musk finds it funny.
A little insider joke, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. So this whole conspiracy, how far-reaching is it, according to Smith?
Extremely. And very, very well organized, operating on that strict need-to-know basis.
The ultimate goal being?
Keep the number of people who know the truth absolutely minimal. Maintain control. That seems to be the core motivation presented.
Does he connect it to other conspiracies, like, say, COVID vaccines?
He actually touches on that briefly. Says he doesn't think the vaccines were for population control, argues that if they wanted to do that, a deadlier virus would be, more efficient.
Interesting take. Does he offer any proofs for the flat Earth himself, things people could check?
He mentions one thing specifically: long-distance radio broadcasts.
How does that prove anything?
He suggests they work because there's no Earth curvature blocking the signal in the upper atmosphere over long distances. The signal can just travel further in a straight line, essentially.
Okay, so no curvature obstruction. What about satellites, then? Communication, GPS, satellite TV.
Yeah.
How does that work without orbiting satellites?
Yeah, he's clear. No satellites orbiting, like we're told. That doesn't happen in his model.
So how does communication work? Cell phones? GPS?
He says it relies on broadcasting from high altitudes. Claims it's more efficient up there in the thinner upper atmosphere, or this liquid space he talks about.
Broadcasting for what? Balloons?
He says they used to use a system of high-altitude balloons, around 80,000 to 110,000 feet.
Used to.
But since about 2013, he claims they've been deploying permanent, neutrally buoyant satellites that just hang suspended in this liquid space layer.
Suspended?
Yeah.
Like underwater, but in the upper atmosphere?
That seems to be the concept, yes. Equipment just floating up there permanently.
But GPS specifically? Satellite phones, how do they work?
He actually says he'll cover those details in a follow-up communication, so not detailed in this batch of documents we have.
Cliffhanger. Okay, so wrapping up his personal situation,
Right.
What's his stance now?
He seems convinced the truth needs to come out, regardless of the potential chaos or social upheaval.
Does he feel safe saying all this?
Apparently not. He mentions feeling watched, believes the conspiracy is aware of him, says he's using false names for protection.
And planning to leave the country?
Yes. Doesn't explicitly state why, but the implication is clearly tied to revealing this information and potential consequences.
Understandable if he believes all this. It leaves a lot of open questions, though, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Huge questions remain just from this text. How everyone sees the moon look the same, the exact path of the sun, this liquid space, how high things really go.
What's beyond the ice wall, other proofs, how GPS works, evidence he even worked at NASA beyond his own claim.
Right. And this Anubis's object, if it's just a broken piece, how does it maintain a perfect eclipse cycle? Lots of loose ends, even within his own narrative here.
Definitely. Well, that certainly covers the core of what Dr. Keith Smith presented in these documents our listeners sent. Quite a picture he paints.
It is. And again, we've just explored the claims as they appear in these communications. It's crucial to remember that.
Absolutely. This is highly unconventional information, obviously, and invites a lot of skepticism.
No doubt. But the takeaways from his narrative itself, the alleged scale of it all, the why behind it, these alternative explanations for things we take for granted, they are, at the very least, thought-provoking.
They certainly are. So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Forget for a moment whether you believe any of it. Just consider, if even a fraction of claims about such a fundamental deception were true, what would that really mean for science, for authority, for our whole understanding of reality?
It definitely encourages you to question assumptions.
It does. Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this very deep dive.